Okay, this is Google Earth, and it's the age of the lithosphere for Google Earth. And I'll just move around to North America. We have North America here, and we have, as per this scale here, oldest continental crust here shown in dark blue through to light blue, indicating the youngest continental crust. Likewise, on this rainbow coloured area, we have oceanic crust, with red indicating the youngest oceanic crust through to the oldest, which is violet, indicating the oldest oceanic crust up against the boundaries of the continental crust. And that correlates to this scale here, with red youngest, purple oldest, violet the oldest. So what you'll notice is there's a continuous red line, and if we follow that red line through the Atlantic Ocean between Africa and the Americas down to Antarctica, there's a mid-oceanic ridge line, as it is known, encircling Antarctica. So the Atlantic oceanic mid-oceanic ridge line comes down to here, and then we can follow it up through to India here. There's India there. There's Madagascar. This is Africa. And if we go back to Antarctica, so we have that expansion joint, and the expansion joint that comes around Antarctica splits off here, and that forms the Pacific. I'll just bring north around. So this is the Pacific Ocean, and this is the mid-oceanic ridge line in the Pacific. So this ridge line, indicated by the red areas, is where new oceanic crust is formed. So new oceanic crust is formed at these red lines, and it adds to the surface area of the Earth. As it increases the surface area of the Earth, it increases the radius of the Earth. These red lines are an expansion joint for the Earth. It is like a seam running around a baseball. Obviously the baseball seam wouldn't look as haphazard as that, but that is what it is. So I'll just bring north around again. You can see that this boundary here of Africa, see that's Africa, that boundary there meets up with this boundary here, and this boundary here meets up with this boundary here. So if this boundary meets up with that boundary, and that boundary meets up with that boundary, then this boundary meets up with this boundary. So Africa used to join with North America. Similarly, this part, the west coast of Africa, used to join up with the east coast of the Americas. Just as this boundary has a halfway boundary here, meets up here, so does this boundary meet up with that boundary. So if that boundary meets up with that boundary, and that boundary meets up with that boundary, then this boundary meets up with that boundary. And you'll find that right throughout the this band of red. Let's have a look, for example, at Australia and Antarctica. I'll just bring north around. Alright, there we have Australia there. Now just take note, I'll just bring Australia into view. Take note that we don't really see a distinguishing shoreline between Papua New Guinea and Australia. That's because we've got submerged continental crust in between. Likewise, Tasmania looks like it's part of the mainland, which it is, because it's in between where you have Bass Strait, you have submerged continental crust. So my understanding is these other blue areas is obviously not oceanic crust, but it's continental crust that hasn't been dated. Okay, so you can see that this boundary here would meet up with this boundary here, and this boundary here of Antarctica would meet up with this boundary here. So if this boundary meets up with that boundary, and that boundary meets up with that boundary, then this boundary on Antarctica meets up with this boundary here on Australia. Let's have a look at Madagascar. Just bring north around, and you can see that Madagascar used to, if this boundary here meets up with this well, it's not a mid-oceanic ridgeline, but you can see that that's young oceanic crust, comparatively speaking, to the surrounding oceanic crust. So this boundary meets with that boundary, and that boundary meets with that boundary. If that boundary meets with that boundary, and that boundary meets with that boundary, then that boundary will meet with that boundary. So Madagascar used to go into that part there of Africa. Okay, where else can we look? Let's look at Greenland. Okay, so we'll just bring north around. So this area here is Greenland. So we can see that this boundary here used to meet up with that boundary there of oceanic crust. And this boundary here used to meet up with that boundary there of oceanic crust. So likewise, if that boundary meets with that boundary and that boundary meets with that boundary, then that boundary must meet with that boundary. And that works right across the whole globe. So if you remove the oceanic crust and you reduce the radius of the Earth accordingly, as the oceanic crust retreats back into the mid-oceanic ridgelines where it was formed, the surface area of the Earth is reduced and the radius of the Earth is reduced a corresponding amount. And that is the world over. The boundaries of the continental crust form a complete interlocking shell at 52% of the Earth's current radius. Okay, so you can check out James Maxlow's website, and you can, if you do a search find for 52%, you'll be able to locate this information. Actually, I'll put a link in the description box below about it. Alright, so the question is, we know, well, before I go on to the question, we know that the Earth is expanding. For those boundaries to meet together, such as I have now described, the the Earth must have expanded. The question is why? How? How did the Earth expand? Why did the Earth expand? We know that it's working against gravity. We know that in terms of potential energy, it's breaking the laws of physics. So it can't possibly, mathematically speaking and physically speaking, it can't be doing it. But according to the geometric evidence, such as the boundaries meeting together, such as they do, it's obvious that the Earth has expanded. So I would put it to you that the reason that the Earth has expanded is because of some major geological event in Earth's history. According to the Bible, in 2349 BC, according to Bishop Ussher's timeline of the Bible, that is when the global flood took place. 100 years after that, a man called Peleg was born, and he was so named because in his days the earth was divided. You can check that out for yourself in Genesis chapter 10, verse 25. So in his days the earth was divided, and his name and his derivative names have geological and geographical meanings, such as earthquake, divide, split, stream, canal, river. Okay, so It's describing the ever widening in the Atlantic, I believe. If 100 meters of lava, which is what the oceanic crust is made out of, it's basalt. If 100 meters of lava flowed for 100 years, we would have something like 3,650 kilometers of oceanic crust, which is about 66% of the Atlantic Ocean spread, as it is today. So, where did all the extra mass come from? Well, I can only assume that prior to the flood, the Earth had a core temperature, nothing like today. It was somewhere between 1 degrees and 99 degrees Celsius, so the temperature of water. And in Genesis chapter 6, verse 17, God says, I, behold, I do bring a flood upon the earth. So it's evident that the flood was a supernatural event. It had supernatural triggers. It was initiated supernaturally by God. So if the Earth's core temperature wasn't as it is today, if it was cooler, and God increased the mass of the Earth, God increased the energy of the Earth, and therefore the expansion of the Earth is a decompression of the Earth. So, expanding Earth, the continental crust boundaries meet together on a smaller shell, on an interlocking shell. James Maxlow has done 23 reconstructions of expanding Earth. I have done a two-stage reconstruction, 100% and a 75% pro rata, and I was able to convince myself that the Earth has expanded based on the geometric evidence. So once again, it is a physical impossibility that the Earth is expanding, yet the boundaries meet together and prove that it has. And I propose to you that expanding Earth was instigated by the global flood. Thanks for listening.